Okay, so welcome everybody to our 236th Reading Online Sports Economics Seminar. Today we have Luca Cermak, who is going to present the negative productivity of strategic flexibility evidence from a natural experiment in football. Just a few things before Luca begins. We are, of course, hosted at the University of Reading, and we're sponsored by the Sports Economics Review, our home field sports economics manuscript. And as always, there's lots of conference announcements in the reminder that's sent out. If you do have your own conference that you'd like to see featured there, I'm very happy to put that in with the abstract deadlines and so on. Nothing else, and make sure that I actually submit a abstract in time for the deadline. There's also free slots in September onwards if you want to present. So if you do have a paper you'd like to give, or you know of someone that does, or a PhD student of yours, please do get in touch and let me know. It would be great to have more speakers in the autumn. Luca, all yours. Luca is happy to take questions as he goes along. Luca, if you're not able to see the hands being raised, I'll interrupt you if you're happy with that.
Yeah, that's totally fine.
Perfect. The floor is yours.
So, thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. And thank you to James and the organizers for having me. Before we jump in, maybe a quick word on mine. My name is Luca Cermak, just Luca, and I'm a PhD candidate at the Institute of Economics at Ulm University in Germany. And my research broadly focuses on cognitive biases in high-stakes environments, mostly in sports, but also with some applications to finance as well. I work, for instance, on discrimination in football, but today I'm presenting my single-authored paper about the negative productivity of strategic flexibility. As James said, please ask questions as soon as they arise, and then let's get started. I want to open with an economic assumption. Something that we are generally confident about in economics is that if you give an expert decision maker more options, you cannot make them worse off. They simply can ignore any new option that doesn't improve the expected outcome. This is the principle of redisposal. However, behavioral economics tells us that under a loss frame, so when someone is trailing below their expectations, there's a documented psychological urge to act, or in other words, referent dependency can trigger a so-called action bias, the urge to act, to do something, to do anything, to disrupt the status quo and regain a sense of control. And this brings me to my research question: when decision makers fall short of their expectations, so when they are in loss frames, does an expanded action space improve their outcomes, or does the impulse to act turn that added capacity into a liability? And to give you a quick preview of my findings, I showed that...
Luca, just to interrupt you have a question already, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Sorry, Luca, but I just want to go back to the free disposal point, which is, and I don't know how important this is to what you're saying, but it doesn't take much within a rational framework to create an example where larger action spaces are not are costly and won't help. So, for example, if for every action there is, for every possible action available, there is a processing cost to evaluate the action, then the marginal cost of additional actions could rise to meet the marginal benefit, and there could be a world in which a larger action space is actually harmful, even if agents are fully rational. So,
yeah.
I don't know how important that is, but it's not. You don't need behavioral economics and irrationality to get a case where larger action spaces are not beneficial.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you. Yeah, maybe I have to reframe my motivation then, but yeah, that's a good point. Thanks. Okay, yeah, but I just continue then to give you a quick preview of my findings. I showed that the expanded substitution allowance in football, so the increasing the substitution allowance from 3 to 5 causally worsens outcomes when teams are behind their expectations, but the exact same expanded allowance improves outcomes when teams are above their expectations. So it's the same expanded action set, but an opposite effect. So what matters is the psychological frame of the manager. To identify this, I exploit a natural experiment. So in May 2020, the IFAB, the International Football Association Board, raised the substitution allowance, so the allowance for each manager to substitute their players from 3 to 5. This was exposed externally for a reason, namely due to fixture congestion and the COVID pandemic. But this was unrelated to any specific team's form or tactical setup. What this gave us was an exogenous expansion of the managerial action space, and I refer to as action space and will analyze whether that actually translates to usable flexibility. And if you look at the table, you'll see that I have two sources of variation. First, within league variation in the 2019-20 season for the Bundesliga, the Premier League, the Serie A, and the La Liga, as the substitution allowance per team per match was, as I said, increased in May from 3 to 5. Ligue 1 was suspended and played all matches under the 3 substitution rule in that season. And additionally, second, I have cross-league variation within the British Premier League. So they adopted the 5 substitution rule in the season 1920, but reverted to the 3 substitution rule in the 2 following seasons, 2021 and 21-22, and then readopted the 5 substitution rule from season 22-23 onwards. This on reversal or switch is the key of my identification. It allows me to disentangle the policy effect from general pandemic trends and empty stadiums that are quite plausibly have when I just analyzed the 1920 season, as well as fatigue or general drifts in tactics. Very briefly on my data set, I closely followed the methodology of the paper of Björn Bartling, Leif Brandes, and Daniel Schunk of 2015 Management Science. And I also use a minute-by-minute panel data of all matches played in the 4 seasons and 5 leagues. So I have a data set of over 7,200 matches, which I web scraped from the German sports magazine Kicker. As secondary data source, I have footballdata.co.uk, where I got the betting odds data from. In particular, I used the Bet365 betting odds. And my minute-by-minute panel data spans roughly 1.3 million observations. And for each observation, I have the exact goal, the exact card, so yellow or red, and the exact timing and type of substitutions. I utilize that Bartling-Brandes-Schunk framework and also the definition of the expectation violation or the loss frame. And as I said, I use the betting odds that form the rational reference point here for the coaches. And their main specification of a loss frame is that a team is in a loss frame when its real-time performance falls below those pre-match expectations. For instance, if they are the clear favorites to win but are currently drawing or losing. And the opposite is, of course, true for being in a gain frame. So if the real-time performance exceeds their expectations. Before we look at the empirics and the results, I want to briefly show you a conceptual framework. And I try organize this around referent-dependent utility framework of Koshigi and Rabin. So a manager chooses a substitution profile S in SK, and K stands for the substitution regime, either 3 or 5. And the policy expands the action space such that S3 is a subset of S5. The referent-dependent utility framework here is the utility and depends on, or is consisting of 3 terms: a performance term, a gain-loss utility, and an additional action bias term. The gain-loss utility here is exactly that reference-dependent piecewise function from Koshigi and Rabin. And if we look at the first term, so when that nu here equals 0, then the manager only cares about the expected objective outcome. I would argue that free disposal applies here and more options weakly help as rational benchmark. But if we add the middle term, so the gain-loss utility exhibiting loss aversion, where lambda in that piecewise function is larger than 1, we get the classic Bartling, Brandes, and Schunk result that managers engage in variance-enhancing risk-taking to try and reach their reference point. If I add the third term, the action bias term, this represents the non-strategic psychological value of acting under perceived loss of control, the action bias. For this paper, I assume A of S, so I do not derive it structurally, but I use this framework as an organizing device. The manager optimizes his utility. I, on the other hand, measure objective outcomes, and the gap between those things is the behavioral effect I measure. A substitution that raises the manager's internal utility might actually lower their expected goal difference. And to distinguish the mechanisms, I have this table here, and this framework I presented briefly is useful because each mechanism implies a different observable pattern in my data. It's just not different stories for the same outcome. And as you see in this table, the types of substitution, this is the first column here, separates rational risk-taking from action bias. Rational risk-taking would imply that mostly coaches substitute more offensively, whilst action bias, also choking and load management, would imply increasing all types of substitutions, defensive and neutral substitutions as well. And the rightmost column, the gain frame effect, is also a key discriminator. The gain frame allows us to rule out alternative theories like general choking under pressure or physical fatigue. And my strategy for the rest of the talk is that I will establish the first stage, and then we can compare the results to this table, eliminating the mechanisms.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt again, but could,
Yeah.
could I ask why it is that in the rational framework they will be biased in favor of offensive players?
To increase their variance and put the pressure more on the opponents and to, yeah, like increase their offensiveness towards eliminating the expectation violation, I would argue.
Wouldn't it be entirely contextual in a rational framework?
Could also be the case, I think, yes. Do I have an example for this? I'm not sure. It could also be to see more neutral changes, but I think you would see generally more offensive ones. Maybe not offensive only, but more offensive ones. Don't you think?
Well, I just think you're making pretty big claims about theory here, which
Okay, yeah.
to be honest, I doubt that it necessarily matters for your results. Your results are probably going to be interesting, but it seems to me like you're kind of trying to force a theory onto your results, which I'm just not sure you need to do that. But
Yeah.
let's see the results. Sorry, I must stop
Okay.
interrupting. Sorry.
No, it's a valid point. Thank you. Could be that the claim is quite strong, yeah. I show this when we get into the mechanisms then, yeah. So generally for the empirical strategy, my strategy is twofold. So stage one is the behavioral question, if the expanded allowance actually changed the substitution behavior in loss frames. And the second is the productivity question, what those marginal substitutions do to the match outcomes. And as I said, my data is on a team minute level, so I measure the substitution behavior of team T in match I during minute M. To answer the second question, the productivity question, I use 2SLS IV approach, and I instrument the substitutions and the substitutions in loss frames using the exogenous policy change and interact the policy change with two variables. First, the real-time loss frame for each minute, and second, an indicator of first half or second half. Why do I use the match half as an indicator? Because first half substitutions are mostly injury forced, and the second half substitutions are the discretionary substitutions that are really driven by the manager's will to substitute. By interacting the policy change with loss frame and match half, I generate 4 instruments and isolate the variation I care about, so the pressure-induced tactical choices managers make when they are trailing later in the game. One word on the exclusion restriction, that is having the option to substitute 5 instead of 3 players moves the score only if the manager acts. And the score only changes if the manager acts. And this gets credibility from the Premier League on reversal. We can here go into the graphics and see the substitution behavior increases with 5 substitutions, again decreases when the substitution allowance was reversed to 3 substitutions, and then increases again when the policy was readopted. And my estimates captured the net policy effect, which includes both the team's interventions and the opponent's response. As I will show you when we get into the game frame results, the strategic interaction actually biases my estimates towards 0 and not away from it. And finally, one word on the complier effect. So I estimate a local average treatment effect. So it's an effect for the compliers, and those are the trailing coaches making a fourth or fifth substitution that they simply wouldn't have been able to make under the old substitution regime. Okay.
Luca, sorry
Yeah.
to interrupt you. A brief
Sure.
clarifying question. Could you please remind me the definition of the loss frame variable? I mean, if I was expected to win and the current score is a draw, am I in the loss frame or not?
You are in the loss frame when at least one goal has been scored. So 1-1 would be qualifying as being in a loss frame. At 0-0 not. So if no goal has been scored, you are not in a loss frame. But when you are like the favorite to win and at least one goal has been scored, even a draw would lead to you being in a loss frame.
Can I ask about the interpretation of this definition? Because, you know, when the bookmakers set their odds, well, they count on 90 minutes, yes? So they think that a team should win after 90 minutes, yes?
Yeah.
So a score of 1-1 can be consistent with their prediction, basically. If we are talking about like the 50th minute, okay?
Yeah.
So why we can interpret that as being in the loss frame?
Yeah, that's a good point, and I can do some robustness on this. I like use this definition as that is the main definition the Bartling-Brandes-Schunk paper makes. And they also have some robustness on it, using, for instance, the expected points. So the real points like weighted on the probabilities, and using, I think it's excluding the draws as well as one robustness check. I haven't done it in my paper. As I said, I follow their main specification, but I could.
Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a good point. Any questions on the empirical strategy or up to here? Then let's look at the raw data, and I have two descriptive facts here. So first, teams in loss frames substitute more than teams in non-loss frames, consistently with the paper of Bartling, Brandes, and Schunk. And second, when looking at the graph here, if you compare the blue and the red lines, you see that the gap significantly widens after the policy change, or the policy change increased the behavioral response here, especially in the second half, so after the 45th minute here, meaning that the extra capacity provided by the rule change is disproportionately utilized when managers are under pressure. A pretty nice graph here. When we compare the minutes relative to the goal, pre-policy change and post-policy, we see that the behavioral response here, so on the y-axis is the number of substitutions per minute, and on the x-axis the minutes relative to a goal, that the effect, so the number, the substitution increase is much higher post-policy compared to pre-policy. And formalizing this using OLS, I have the number of substitutions per minute as my dependent variable and 4 different specifications. In all, I control for the exact goal difference at each minute and have team match fixed effects. And additionally, for OLS2, I control for previous match events, here concrete the red cards. And for OLS3 and 4, I additionally use minute fixed effects as well. I cluster standard errors by match. And my number of observations are, as I pointed out, roughly 1.3 million. If you look here at the shaded green row, you see that the interaction between the loss frame and the policy change is positive and highly significant across all specifications. For instance, in the OLS4, we can interpret the 0.018 as that the policy induced an additionally 0.018 substitutions per minute for teams that were trailing expectations after the policy change or additionally. And you might notice here in column 3 and 4 that the main effect for the loss frame flips to negative. That is because I use minute fixed effects here. And we can interpret this as loss frames occur later in matches when the baseline substitution rates for all teams are already high and conditional on that minute. Trailing teams substitute less, slightly less at baseline, but interaction with the policy remains robustly positive. So expanded action space triggers that behavioral reaction to pressure. Now we come to the 2 SLS productivity results, so the impact of that additional marginal substitutions on the match result, which I here use as the final goal difference. I also have 4 specifications. I can, as the dependent variable, as the final goal difference, as this is constant for each team within a match, not also use team match fixed effects, so I have a different fixed effect structure. I have team fixed effects, match day league fixed effects, and opponent fixed effects varying between the 4 specifications. The controls are also slightly different. I control for if the match was a ghost match, played at home, also for the exact goal difference, their interaction with being in a loss frame, and controlling for red cards into SLS8 as well. I presented the first stage F statistic for substitution times loss frame in the last row as well. And I continue using the match standard errors and the clustered standard errors by match. When we look into the shaded row, the instrumented interaction term is negative, significant, and stable between minus 3.5 and 3.8. But I want to be precise here, the number does not mean that one substitution costs a team 3.7 goals. So this is a minute level 2 SLS coefficient. As we know, the estimator divides the reduced form over the first stage probability. The first stage probability is quite small, so this coefficient is mechanically inflated. The interpretable effect is the match level effect. So I did a backwards calculation of multiplying the substitution times loss frame interaction with the additional loss frame substitutions after the policy change, leading to roughly 1.5 goals per complier match effect, which is more interpretable. The confidence interval spans from -2 to -1, and that is equal to 0.8 standard deviations of the goals scored in my dataset. Why is the effect so large? So compliers, as I said, are trailing teams in late game states, and so disruptive reactive interventions can destroy the team coordination, forecloses an already low probability of comeback. So the effect is quite large, but we should not interpret this as an average treatment effect here. I find the exact negative signs for final points earned, meaning that final goal difference and final points go into the same direction, rejecting that rational expected points risk taking to increase the variance. And you see that both go into the same direction. The effect here is roughly -4. But however, we want to look at the direction of the effect, and that is the same. Okay. Now we want to test the alternative mechanisms. And a standard critique could be that the fourth and the fifth player that we substitute in are just worse players. Could also be that those players are generally more exhausted. And that is why I'm doing the gain frame analysis here. And when we look again at the green shaded row, the substitution gain frame interaction, we see when teams are outperforming expectations, the exact same expanded action set leads to more productive, positive outcomes in a similar absolute effect. And this allows us to ruling out first declining bench quality. So if the fourth and the fifth player would be bad players, they would hurt the team in both frames, but they don't. It also rules out the choking under pressure or cognitive overload. If 5 options would generally be too complex to manage, performance would also drop in both frames. And teams in gain frames are the underdogs. They have usually weaker squads, and we see they are overperforming here. So they can use the extra substitutions better than the favorites. They couldn't. Meaning that is not the bench depth here at play. And this psychological mechanism is further supported by looking at who is most affected, and the negative effect is stronger for the close favorites, for the clear favorites compared to the close favorites. So I define clear favorites as if their implied winning probability is above 50%. And close favorites are where the implied winning probability is above 0 and below 10%. And for the clear favorites, where the gap between the pre-game expectations and their scoreline creates massive psychological shock. And for the close matches, that deviation effect is smaller. And that is what we would expect from referent-dependent preferences. The larger the gap, the stronger the urge to overreact, and the worse the outcome in the end. And what are the coaches doing? Are they just taking more offensive players? And that is not the case. So here on the left side, I plot the substitutions, comparing defensive, neutral, and offensive substitutions, with on the right side the substitutions, the marginal substitutions after the policy change. And on the left side, the pre-policy behavior replicates the results of Bartling, Brandes, and Schunk. When trailing, coaches increase their offensive risk-taking behavior. We see this in OLS 3 and 4, and sacrifice more neutral and defensive ones, meaning that this is really rational risk-taking. And I would argue on the right side, we see an action bias here, that the expanded allowance increase the substitution behavior over all types, defensive, neutral, and offensive. The most increases in the neutral substitutions. And I would say when swapping, for instance, defender for defender, when you're losing late in the game, probably provides not that offensive upside you will want to have to eliminate the expectation violation, but mostly disrupts your defensive coordination. So this is not really an rational objective, but really consistent with that action bias, just intervening for the sake of action. The results do not contradict the Bartling, Brandes, Schunk paper, so the overall average substitution still looks like risk-taking, but the marginal fourth and fifth substitution in loss frames do not. I asked myself whether managerial experience can buffer against this, and what I plotted here in red are the marginal effects for the senior coaches. I define senior coaches as coaches above 50, so over 50 years of age, relative to non-senior coaches. And as those effects here on the right side in the substitution loss frame panel are indistinguishable from zero, I can tell that the data yields no detectable protective effect, meaning that senior coaches do not show a better performance outcome under loss frame pressure relative to their younger coaches, meaning that the pressure-induced action bias is pervasive and experience fails to override the impulse to over-intervene in high-stakes moments. But I should mention that age is an imperfect proxy and the triple interaction is quite statistically underpowered comparing to the analysis before. So this is an absence of evidence, not evidence of absence. Before I conclude, I run several robustness checks to rule out other rational stories and to show that the effect really is robust. First, regarding the ghost games, I control for the ghost games in all specifications, allowing me to tell that the effect persists in anti-stadiums, telling us that the pressure is internal, so based on the expectation violation, and not, at least not purely driven by the social pressure of the screaming crowd. Second, the effect is robust to controlling for the fixture congestion, so robust to controlling for the days since the last and until the next match. So not purely a story of physical fatigue management. It also holds when excluding a 5-minute window after conceded goal, proving that it's not just a mechanical artifact of that volatile chaos, of that volatile states. And finally, I did a placebo tests on yellow cards, yielding a null result, supporting that the exclusion restriction, that the policy just doesn't move unrelated match margins like here the intensity. supporting the exclusion restriction. And here, for transparency and comparison, as the estimated late effect is so huge, I plotted a specification curve analysis across 48 different models, varying the fixed effect structure, for instance, swapping the team fixed effects with coach fixed effects, varying the control sets and opponent parameters, and the late remains negative and statistically significant in all specifications, tightly clustered between -4 and -3 goals at the event level. Okay, now I want to wrap up. More options made expert decision makers worse. I showed that an exogenous expansion of the action space causally degraded performance under pressure. Second, the cause is psychological. The same capacity helps in gain frames. And we see that the effect is concentrated or more strongly among the favorites. And the gain frame analysis rules out that bench quality is a factor here. We can also rule out resource constraints and general choking. And the results are pretty consistent with that action bias that we see an increase in all substitution types, defensive ones, offensive ones, and neutral ones, not just offensive ones. Interpreting this that coaches act for the sake of acting, not for increasing their rational variance. Ultimately, this shows that the assumption of free disposal fails under pressure, as I would say, as a larger action space is not automatically more usable flexibility. Where agents face frequent feedback, conditioning flexibility on state can beat expanding it unconditionally. And that wraps up my talk. Thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to your questions or your feedback.
Thank you very much, Luca. I'm going to give you a round of applause. A really interesting talk on substitutions, and I'm just disappointed that England didn't gain from a substitution made in the gain state on Wednesday evening. But questions, lots of time for questions and comments now. And Steve has got his hand up, so go ahead, Steve.
Luca, thank you for this. As some of the regulars know, I am not an economist. I'm a law professor, so I won't be able to help you with any of your mathematical models and slides there. But I do want to raise a question about how clubs should respond to your work. It is this draws similarities to, and you might consider looking at or including the literature from management literature in strategy, which constantly talks about the pressure to stick to a strategy and avoid short-term fixes that deviate from a strategic plan. And there's a lot of literature in the business strategy literature about this. One of the things that a few people have talked about, and I don't know where it is in the literature, in business is the role of lawyers in a corporation, because one of the things lawyers are good at is compliance, like is your business complying with the law? And the same skill is often used by lawyers to make sure that vice presidents and others are actually sticking to the strategy that the CEO and the board has adopted. So with that in mind, I wonder if you might consider whether there's an appropriate role in strategy, either not necessarily in the moment with the game, but in terms of afterwards, to having a club have someone who is thinking about these sorts of things and figuring out ways to work with the coach to minimize irrational biases and keep the manager in the game focused on the correct decision. I know in American football, where it's easier to do, and you might also look to coaching literature in the United States about this. In American literature, many clubs do have this process by which the coaches and other personnel who are not coaches after a game evaluate the calls on the field to see if it's good or not. And then my final suggestion is if you ever want to expand this, or once you publish this paper, is to see if you could figure out a way to study in American football whether you have the same phenomena. That is, your research would suggest that in American football, coaches call plays that are good for their team, but when the team is losing or a team that is losing is below expectations, they start doing things that actually make things worse for the team rather than better for the team. And I think that would have a real interesting impact on American football as well. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. I think they are pretty important points. To your question, I don't think that there is a specific role in football at the moment. I could imagine that some of the roles might be set up, and I took some points for me to comparing football and the soccer. I think they are important points. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. More questions and comments? Stefan.
Hi, Luca. It's very getting irritated by you, but it's very interesting. So I'm curious about this. So one problem I had was this, that it strikes me that and you perhaps it's my misunderstanding, so you can probably explain if I'm getting this wrong. Essentially the test is you're running a regression of the outcome on the minute in which a substitution occurs multiplied by being in the loss frame. So in other words, so what that seems to me to say is that whenever you're in when you're in a lot, you'll go, yeah. So in all of these cases, the team is behind, and the outcome turns out to be not good for the team. And so in some sense, the substitution is just playing the role as a dummy variable for a particular minute in the game. So any other minute in the game that you chose where there wasn't a substitution and interacted that with the loss frame, you'd also get a very negative and significant coefficient. So I'm just wondering whether you're just not picking up that losing teams are doing worse than expected, rather than it's anything to do with the substitution itself. Does that make sense?
Yes, that makes sense. And I think I have an answer to this. As I control for the exact score line, so the exact goal difference in each minute, I think I control for that this is really the substitution effect.
Well, I was thinking.
I can.
Sorry, go
on. Maybe it's better to look at the first stages, what my controls and my interactions and first stages are. So I control for the exact goal difference in each minute, the exact goal difference interacted with the loss frame, the general loss frame. Those are the policy change instruments. I can also make it a bit here.
Oh, good. That's better.
And that should like eliminate the effect that you are raising, right?
Yeah, yeah, maybe it should. So I wonder, the test I thought you could do as a kind of a placebo is choose just random minutes
Yeah.
and interact them at the loss frame and see what that did. Did you try that?
I did not, but I will consider it definitely random as placebo tests.
Because the other thing was striking me was this is that whenever a team is behind in a loss frame, the other team is ahead in a winning frame, right?
Yeah.
So something that's balanced, and so why isn't it that again? Why isn't it the policy of the other team that's driving the success of the team, not the not. So hang on. So whatever the if I substitute when I'm ahead, so everybody's substituting, right? Everybody's using these substitutions, right, in this period, and so it strikes me that a likely thing is that if you the more substitutions is more beneficial to a team that's winning than a team that's losing. So in other words, it's easier to park the bus, which England did in Mexico, but successful, unsuccessful against Argentina, obviously. But but it's easier to do it when you've got more substitutes, right? And so in that sense, you're just picking up the fact that the increase in substitutions works against teams that are behind and in favor of teams that are ahead, just as a general principle.
Yeah, that is right. I cannot rule out if that's true. I have one test at least going into that direction. I have it here. If I control for the opponent substitutions lagged by the minutes before, seeing that the effect is robust as well. However, this does not tackle the exclusion restriction. It's only a control, but at least goes into that direction, I think. But yeah.
And now I'm still trying to think about what this regression is. So it's this is the dependent variable here is the state of the game in a particular minute, or it's the final?
The final one. Yeah.
So and the substitution times loss frame, is that a time specific variable, or is it when does it bite? Is it from the moment you're substituted? Is it one from the moment you're substituted to the end of the game, or
it is one for each substitution. So the loss frame is of course minute dependent. The loss frame is one when a team is in a loss frame in that particular minute, but the substitution is just a dummy variable 0 or 1 if the team substituted within that minute.
But the minute after the substitution, is this variable now 0 at that point, or is it still?
Yeah, it is 0.
Okay, so the substitution can only have an effect in that 1 minute of the game, because surely a substitution would have an effect should have effect throughout the entire rest of the game, shouldn't it?
I chime in just to say that I agree with Stephen. This seems like I think this minute by minute just seems like a problem. Why don't you just do total was there a substitution or a number of substitutions per game as the right-hand side variable?
I can do this as well, yeah. So swapping the substitution dummy for the number of substitutions until that minute or something, yeah. Yeah, I could do that.
I mean, it's try. I mean, if this changes all of your results, I don't think you should worry about it too much. I think that's fine. I think this is really interesting what you're doing, and I think it's a framework worth pursuing. I think it sounds like Danielle agrees with me that I think you might have got this slightly wrong on the specification, but I think you can sort it out. And even if it doesn't, even if it changes the results, it's still interesting, right? I mean, so my view would be that, like I said, I think the main point should be more substitutions should be helping teams that are ahead on balance rather than behind, I would think. And that I think is the sort, for me, that's what I would want to focus on. Is it, who is it helping more? And I drop all the stuff about rationality because, again, you were throwing in judgments there about what you thought a coach should do in particular cases. I mean, yeah, sure, it's fine for you to think that coaches should not substitute. It's not rational for a coach to substitute a defender when they're behind. But you know, you're not a coach, and I'm not a coach, and we don't know. Maybe they know things we don't know. We don't want to pose as experts. Although I think James knows what England should have done yesterday. I think that's.
But yeah, that's a good point. I take that with me. Thank you.
But very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's good stuff.
Danielle, have you got a question?
Yes. Hi. So I apologize. I listened to the first part of the talk where I was sort of walking, and so I didn't quite see the slides. But I'm looking at the paper, so I have posted on SSRN, so I have some idea. Can you walk us through again sort of the late versus OLS logic? Because I find those two SLS coefficients a little bit too large for my taste.
Yeah.
And I'm not even sure that I agree with the claim that, well, OLS, that they go in the right direction, because my first intuition would be, if I'm in a loss frame, things are going badly, my team is clearly not performing up to par, and the more badly the team is performing, the more likely the coach would want to intervene and make substitutions. And so if anything, I would expect, maybe substitutions are not that effective. And so if anything, I would expect that the OLS is too much of a negative effect. And you find that it's, the IV coefficients are, I don't know, 10 times, 20 times as large as the 100 times as large as the OLS coefficients. I don't know, like just something that is really, really hard to digest, at least for me.
Yeah. I have the OLS results here, so we can compare, and the OLS results are quite small. So they are negative. They are roughly 0.08 minus. And yeah, as you said, the two SLS results are roughly, I don't know, 30 times, 40 times larger. Yeah, that is true. So my reasoning behind was that OLS might be biased as better teams can substitute better players and probably also substitute more. And that is why the OLS is biased upwards. And you should see a more negative
is it the
effect.
case that better teams have, do more substitutions? That's something that you could verify easily, right?
I could, yes.
I mean, I understand the logic that better teams have deeper benches, and so the player number 16 is going to be sort of closer to the level of like the starting 11 than that on weaker teams. But it just seems that, yes, I buy that, but I view that as somewhat second order relative to just like the game is going badly, we're not performing up to par, things are going bad, we have to do something.
Yeah, that's a good point. I could check that, right?
Yeah, and I think that I would encourage you to think what is the right do you really need for the productivity analysis, do you really need a sort of minute by minute specification, or is it really like at the match level final goal difference or final goal difference after the substitution as a function of the number of substitutions made.
Yeah.
And I do realize that there is an issue here, like when you make the substitution, clearly you would expect an 85th minute substitution to be less effective than a 65th minute substitution because the substitute has had sort of less time to sort of to impact the game. I'm not quite sure what is the right way to do it, but this needs. It would also just make things a little bit more transparent, and maybe the simple solution is like to keep the minute level analysis that you do, but what Stefan was suggesting is that that indicator turns on for every minute after the substitution has taken place, so you don't switch it back to 0 in the minute after the substitution.
Yeah, I definitely will try this. One point regarding the minute by minute level here, that was a point we discussed so hardly at the Institute as well. And we said it makes the instrumenting much easier as I have the substitution and substitution loss frame to instrument. And that is why I use the minute by minute to instrument this as I do here. So that I can use like the indicators for the policy change, the policy loss frame, the policy loss frame first half, and so on. But yeah, I get the point definitely.
Yeah, I'm not sure I know the right answer to this. It just seems that it's not obvious, and so it could give rise to unexpected results that hasn't really sort of worked out fully.
That's right.
Yeah,
I could try it on a match level. I have to think about it, and yeah, maybe it goes in, hopefully goes in the same direction. Yeah. Thank you.
Welcome.
Great. Thanks, Daniel.
And sorry, so the other comment was,
yeah.
So right now you're just looking at sort of the final outcome of the match, but I think there may be some value in defining the dependent variable as the goal difference after the substitution.
I tried running the regression with the catch-up effect. So like the difference between the current minute goal difference and the final goal difference, but the effect goes into the same direction as well. And this is
if then
almost...
I mean it's still worth reporting. I think I don't know, maybe your robustness checks, but I think that's pretty important.
Okay, yeah, that's a good point. Noted as well. Thanks.
Thanks, Daniel.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Just to add, in the work that I've done on substitutions, similar to yours, Luca, I've also used, as Daniele mentioned, the difference between the score at the time and the final score. That somehow seemed intuitive to me, but I guess that's not necessarily the obvious metric by which to make decisions. I wondered, because you mentioned at the start the fact that the Premier League's a little bit different in the sense that they went to 5 and then back down to 3 and then back up to 5. I don't know whether you had a look at that dynamic at all, whether the effect was that they got worse and then they got better again when they were back to 3 for those 2 seasons. I don't know whether you had a look at that at all.
Not on the total effect, so just on the first stage, just if they really substituted more. Not on the productivity, unfortunately, but I could do this as well.
So that's number of substitutions, right?
Yeah, that's the number of substitutions.
Yeah. I guess one other comment I might make is obviously quite a bit of this. You've talked about the quality of the bench and better teams and so on. Are you measuring that by the team's league position, or are you able to get, measures of player quality, I don't know, transfer market values, things like that?
I have the transfer market value as well, and I control for this.
Mhm.
And we see that the favorites really substitute more valuable players in, and but they really cannot catch up. So the effect even holds when controlling for the transfer value of the substituted players.
Yeah. Right. Any more questions and comments? Okay. Well, thank you very much, Luca. That was a hugely interesting talk with some very striking findings. I wish you all the best as you pursue this work towards publication. Thank you for being willing to present. Thank you, everyone, for attending. We will return again next week. Next week, we have Claire Dunacroix from the University of Pittsburgh, presenting racial retaliation and updating Black athletes and racial hate. So please do join us next week. In the meantime, have a great weekend. Enjoy the third place playoff and the World Cup final, and see you all very soon. Thanks again, Luca.
Thank you so much. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye.